I still hear the sound of machetes, the swish of the blades cutting through the air, the screams, and then silence. Sometimes, I think the silence is worse. I was 14. It was April 1994. The radio had been playing strange messages for weeks, telling neighbors to turn on each other, calling people cockroaches. But I never thought it would come to this. How could it? We all lived together. We went to the same schools, shared meals, laughed at the same jokes. But that night, everything changed. They came to our village in the dark, shouting or banging on doors, dragging people out. My father told us to hide in the back room. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. My little sister Jean was crying. She was only 6. My mother held her close, covering her mouth. I could feel my heart pounding so loud, I thought they would hear it. When they broke into our house, my father tried to stop them. I heard him say, "Please, we are your neighbors. We've done nothing wrong." Then came the sound I will never forget. A third. And another. My mother squeezed her eyes shut. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was full of sand. They found us. They dragged us out into the yard. The moon was bright and I could see their faces. Faces I knew. Faces I'd seen every day. One of them, Paul, used to give me sweets when I was a kid. Now he held a machete in his hand. His eyes looked dead. "Do we take all of them?" one of them asked. "No. Just the mother and the little one," another said. My mother begged them. She got down on her knees, pleading for Jean's life. They didn't care. They pulled Jean from her arms and took them both away. My mother's screams echoed in the night until they didn't anymore. I was left with my brother, Amable. They told us to run. "Go," Paul said, waving his machete. "You're lucky." But there was no luck in that moment. Only fear. We ran into the forest, stumbling over roots and rocks. We ran until our legs gave out, and then we crawled. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of blood. The forest became our home. We hid during the day and moved at night. Sometimes we found other survivors. Sometimes we found bodies. Once we found a small boy crying next to his mother's body. He couldn't have been older than 3. Amable carried him for miles, but the boy never spoke. He died 2 days later. We survived on wild fruits and whatever scraps we could find. Amable always made sure I ate fast. He'd say, "You're smaller. You need it more." I didn't argue. I was too scared to argue about anything. One night, we heard voices. Soldiers. They weren't like the killers from our village. These were Rwandan Patriotic Front soldiers, fighting to stop the genocide. They gave us water, food, and a little hope. They told us we'd be safe now. I wanted to believe them, but safety felt like a dream I couldn't remember. When the killing finally stopped, we went back to the village. Or what was left of it. Our house was burned. The streets were empty. I found my father's body in the yard, but we never found my mother or Jean. I like to think they are at peace wherever they are. But I don't know. Life after the genocide was harder than I can explain. The people who had been our neighbors were now our enemies. But they were also still our neighbors. Some of them came back pretending nothing had happened. Paul came back. He tried to talk to me once, but I couldn't even look at him. Years later, he stood in front of the Gakaka court confessing his crimes. He cried. He said he was sorry. I didn't believe him. But I said I forgave him. Not for him. For me. Carrying all that hate was too heavy. Now I live in Kigali. I'm married with 2 children. I tell them about Jean and our parents. I tell them about Amable, who didn't make it through the first year after the genocide. I tell them so they understand what hate can do. So they understand why forgiveness is important even when it feels impossible. But some nights, when it's too quiet, I still hear the machetes, the screams, and the silence that followed.